From the Occult Anatomy of Man, Manly P. Hall. This is Part 3, the Spinal Column. Connecting the two worlds, heaven above and the sphere of darkness below, is the spinal column, a chain of 33 segments protecting within them the spinal cord. This ladder of bones plays a very important part in the religious symbolism of the ancients. It is often referred to as a winding road or a stairway. Sometimes it is called the serpent, at other times the wand or scepter. The Hindus teach that there are 3 distinct canals or tubes in the spinal system. They call them Ida, Pingala, and Sushumna. These tubes connect the lower generative centers of the body with the brain. The Greeks symbolized them by the caduceus, or the winged staff of Hermes. This consisted of a long rod, the central Sushumna, which ended in a knob or a ball, which is the pons of the medulla oblongata. On each side of the knob are the wings arched over, used to represent the 2 lobes of the cerebrum. Up this staff and twisted around it wind 2 serpents, one black, the other white. These represent the Ida and Pingala. The ancient Hindus have a legend concerning the goddess Kundalini, in which it is said that she descended by means of a ladder or cord from heaven to a little island floating in the great sea. Connecting this with embryology, it is evident that the ladder or cord represents the umbilical cord, while the little island is the solar plexus. When the ladder is cut away from heaven, the goddess flees in terror to a cave, the sacral plexus, where she hides far from the sight of men. Like Amaterasu, the Japanese goddess of the shining face, she must be lured from her cave, for while she is there and refuses to come forth, the world is in darkness. Kundalini is a Sanskrit word meaning a serpentine or twisting gas or force. This force, so the Eastern sages claim, can be drawn up through the central spinal canal. When this essence strikes the brain, it opens the centers of spiritual consciousness and inner perception, bringing with it spiritual illumination. The system of culture whereby this is made possible is the most secret teaching of the Eastern saints, for they realize that this spiral, twisting force is not only illuminating, but, like the serpent, which is its symbol, is also a deadly poison. Smatterings of the Eastern occultism are coming up all the time into the Western world, but we are sorry to say that they are bringing with them endless suffering and sorrow, for these great truths in the hands of individuals incapable of rightly understanding or applying them destroy intelligence and reason. Along the spine are a number of nerve ganglia and plexus. All of these have their place in religious symbolism. For example, we are told that the early Jews called the sacral plexus and the sacrococcygeal ganglion the cities of Sodom and Gomorrah. There is a small plexus in the region of the kidneys called the sagittarial plexus, which the ancients knew as the city of Tarsus, where St. Paul fought with the beasts. Higher occultism teaches that the lotus blossoms, the nerve centers on the spine, are reflections or negative poles bearing witness of 7 great positive centers of consciousness located in the brain. These 7 function through the centers on the spine. These 7 function through the centers on the spine in approximately the same way that the 7 spirits before the throne function through the planetary bodies. The disciple is warned not to work with the centers upon the spine, but to labor instead with their true rulers, the centers in the brain. The wandering of the children of Israel in the wilderness, the pilgrimage of the Mohammedan to Mecca, the endless pilgrimages of Hindu holy men who spend their lives wandering from one shrine to another, these all represent the pilgrimage of the spirit fire, Kundalini, through the nerve centers along the spine. By certain specifications, force is turned into these centers, one after the other, until, when seen clairvoyantly, they are great flower-like areas from which light rays stream like petals. Each of the lotus blossoms has a different number of petals according to the number of nerves which branch out from it. It is said that the Logos, when the time came to create the material universe, entered a state of deep meditation, centralizing his thought power upon the 7 flower-like centers of the 7 worlds. Gradually, his life force descended from the brain, which was the great superior world, and, striking these flowers one after another, gave birth to the lower worlds. When at last his spirit fire struck the lowest center, the physical world was created, and his fire was at the base of the spine. When the world returns to him again, and he once more becomes supreme in consciousness, it will be because he withdraws the life from these 7 centers, beginning with the lowest, and returns it again to the brain. Thus, the path of evolution for all living things is to raise up this fire, whose descent made their manifestation in the lower worlds possible, and whose raising brings them into harmony once more with the superior worlds. This myth of the life force that came down and took upon itself worlds is found among all the civilized nations of the earth. This is the Hiram Abif who built the Masonic temple, the bodies, and was then slain by the 3 vehicles which he formed. This is also likewise the Christ, slain for the sins of the world. Because of the fact that the spinal fire is a twisting, serpentine force, the snake has been used in all parts of the world to represent the world saviors. The uraeus, worn by the Egyptian priests upon their foreheads, like the brazen serpent raised by Moses in the wilderness, was symbolic of the Kundalini, the sacred cobra, who, when she was raised in the wilderness, saved all who gazed upon her. As the brain is the center of the divine world, so the solar plexus is the center of the human. For representing semi-consciousness, it links the unconscious below with the consciousness above. Man is not only capable of thinking with his brain, he is capable of a certain phase of thought through the nerve centers of the solar plexus. It will probably be wise at this point to describe the difference between a medium and a clairvoyant. To the average person, there may be no difference. But to the mystic, these 2 phases of spiritual sight are separated by an entire span of human evolution. A clairvoyant is one who has raised the spinal serpent into the brain and, by his growth, earned the right of perceiving in the invisible worlds with the aid of the 3rd eye, or the pineal gland. This organ of consciousness, which millions of years ago connected man to the invisible worlds, closed sometime during the Lemurian period, when the objective senses began to develop. The occultists, however, by this process of development hinted at before, may reopen this eye, and by means of it explore the invisible worlds. Clairvoyants are not born, they are made. Mediums are not made, they are born. The clairvoyant can become only such after years, sometimes multiple lifetimes, of self-preparation. On the other hand, the medium, by sitting in a darkened room or other similar practices, may secure results in but a few days. The medium uses the solar plexus as a mirror, and upon its sensitive nerves are reflected pictures recorded in the invisible ethers. Through the spleen, which is the gateway to the etheric body, the medium permits decarnate intelligences to come into his spiritual constitution, the result being voices and other spirit manifestations. Automatic writing is gained by permitting the etheric arm of an outside intelligence to control temporarily the physical arm of the medium. This is not possible until the medium removes his own etheric double from the arm, for 2 things cannot occupy the same place at the same time. The result of separating the life forces from the physical arm periodically is disastrous, often resulting in paralysis. Mediumship is unnatural to man, while clairvoyance is the natural result of growth and the unfolding of spiritual nature. There are 100 mediums to 1 clairvoyant, for the clairvoyant can become such only through self-mastery and the exertion of tremendous power, while the weaker more sickly and the more nervous an individual is, the more likely, the better of a medium he is to make. The clairvoyant is unfolding his mind by filling it with useful knowledge, while the first instruction given to the would-be medium is, make your mind all blank. The reason why mediumship through the solar plexus is a retrogression may be summed up as follows. The group spirits who control the destinies of the animal kingdoms govern their charges through the pictures thrown against the solar plexus, for the animal has no self-conscious mind. As a result, instead of thinking with its own brain, it thinks with the brain of the group spirit, to whom it is attached by the invisible magnetic cords. These cords convey their impressions and photograph them upon the sympathetic nervous system. Having no will of its own, the animal is incapable of combating these urges, and it consequently obeys them implicitly. Man governs himself, hopefully, through the cerebrospinal nervous system. Man, however, has developed individuality, and the sympathetic system no longer rules over him. Opening himself to impulses through the solar plexus area, the medium is therefore thwarting his own growth by preventing the cerebrospinal nervous system from controlling his destiny. Man has always liked to lean on external things. He hates to face each problem and solve it with the brain that God gave him. He consequently leans on the invisible worlds, asking them to help him to accomplish the labors which he should do so by his own efforts, much as modern humans lean onto AI, which just disgusts me. And that's all the commentary I'll make on that. Let us continue. Thousands of people must carry the karmic responsibilities of the medium, for many follow this calling because hundreds of people want to talk to deceased relatives or get inside tips on the stock exchange. Those who, by their patronage, encourage things of which they do not themselves approve are personally responsible for the injury which their selfishness has thus permitted other persons to inflict upon themselves. The difference, therefore, between mediumship and clairvoyance is about half the length of the spinal column. It is the difference between negative and positive, the difference between the midnight of the seance room and the noonday of the temple. All of the organs within the body of man have their religious significance. The heart, with its chambers, is itself a temple, standing upon the mountain of the diaphragm. The spleen, with its little umbrella-shaped body, collects the sun's rays and has charge of the etheric body. It is this etheric body, coiled within the spleen, that injects the white blood corpuscles into the circulatory system. We know that the human body has been the inspiration for nearly all mechanical contrivances. Hinges have been copied from the human body, likewise the ball and socket joint. We are told the first plumbing was reproduced from the arterial and venous circulatory systems. Hundreds of machines and implements which work around us have been inspired by the subtle workings of our own vehicles. For the human body is the most marvelously constructed machine which the human mind can study. The close relationship between the generative system below and the brain above, for the brain is a positive generating system, is, of course, due to the spine that connects them. At a certain time, the number of little doors, which now separate the brain from the generative system, are opened, and the Sushumna becomes an open tunnel, so that every impulse is carried immediately to both ends of the body. It is for this reason that the candidate assumes the vows of celibacy, for the close connection existing in the advanced disciple between the brain and the reproductive system necessitates an absolute conservation of all life energies. The tonsils are directly connected with the generative system. In fact, they are part of the positive pole in the brain. The present deplorable custom of vaccinating children and cutting out their tonsils the moment that they appear in the world will sometime result in a distinct degeneration of the race. Again, published in the early 20th century here. Most tonsils are infected as the result of the child eating too many sweets during the first few years of life. The moral is don't cut out the tonsils, cut out the sweets. Most parents are responsible for the sickness of their own children, though through either ignorance or indulgence they allow the infantile consciousness, as yet uncontrolled by its higher vehicles, to destroy itself before life fairly begins. When children are sick during the early years of life, the physician will usually find the cause of the ailment in the parent, and the father or mother, if and not the child, should be dosed with pills. If the stomach is kept in proper condition, the tonsils will give very little trouble. The absolute economy exhibited by nature in the building of all its structures should be sufficient proof that the Lord was not wasting his time when he made tonsils and appendices. He apparently had a reason for making them, but these poor, unoffending organs have become a gold mine to medical scientists who remove them at the slightest provocation. We are told that the vertical position assumed by the human body, which therefore forces the contents of the intestinal tract to travel part of the time uphill, is the contributing cause of the appendix, which is missing in creatures of horizontal stature. Every organ not only has its visible purpose, but also has an invisible, spiritual purpose, and the individual is to be envied who manages to go through life preserving intact as many as possible of his original anatomical parts and members. While on the subject of the debt of science to the human body, we might add that the decimal system is the result of the primitive man counting on his fingers, whereby 10 became the unit of enumeration. The ancient cubit also was the distance merely between the elbow and the end of the second finger, or approximately 18 inches. So it goes back through the study of things until we find that nearly everything with which man has surrounded himself is an adaptation from the body with which God surrounded his spirit. Man is gradually gaining control not only over the organs of his body, but also over their functions. Science states that certain organs function automatically or mechanically, but occultism realizes that there is nothing mechanical about the functions of the human body. Let us take, for example, a workman throwing a piece of iron among the wheels and levers of a smoothly working machine. There is a grinding crash, and the machine stops. If, on the other hand, you throw a monkey wrench, figuratively, into the human body, it would immediately begin the process of throwing it back at you. It would surround the foreign element with a coating, and it would try to absorb it. If this were impossible, it would then try to eject it through some channel appointed for that purpose. If this means failed, it would, in many cases, accustom itself to the presence of the obstacle and would keep right on working anyways. This shows unmistakably that the organic parts of man possess some inherent form of intelligence. Therefore, they are not machines, for no mechanical device is capable of intelligence. Paracelsus, the great Swiss physician who, after many years in the Far East, returned to Switzerland to teach medicine, first gave to the European world its concept of the nature spirits. Paracelsus taught that the functions of nature were under the control of little creatures, invisible to the normal senses, but who, working through the kingdoms of life, minerals, plants, animals, and parts of the human body, kept all of these evolving in an intelligent way. Under the control of the great celestial hierarchy of Scorpio, which has charge of all the body building in nature, these elementals are the invisible intelligences governing the human body and its functions. As the result of man's ever-evolving consciousness, he is acquiring more complete control over the functions of his various organs. There are two kinds of muscles, voluntary and involuntary. The difference being that the voluntary muscles, which are controlled by the conscious mind of the individual, have fibers running two ways and crossing each other, while those which are involuntary are without the cross fibers. The heart used to be considered an involuntary muscle, but it is now becoming now beginning to show cross fibers, thus foreshadowing the day when man will consciously and intelligently regulate the beating of his own heart. The same will be true with respect to all other organs that survive the periodic changes taking place in the constitution of man. The Eastern holy man can live successfully without his heart beating. He can stop it or start it at will. By lifting the tongue so that it closes the air passages into the lungs, he can remain in suspended animation for months without dying. Many Eastern chelas do this while being given spiritual initiations out of the physical body. There are cases on record where these holy men have been buried in the ground. Weeks later, when the body was dug up, it was found to be dried like leather. Water was poured on it, and after a certain lapse of time, the man who had not taken a breath in weeks got up and walked off. This is the result of extraordinary control which the mind is capable of gaining over the functions of the body. Occultism teaches that there is an entire universe within the human body, that it has its worlds, its planes, its gods, and its goddesses. Millions of minute cells are its inhabitants. These are grouped together into kingdoms, nations, and races. There are the bone cells, the nerve cells, and millions of these tiny creatures grouped together become one thing composed of many parts. The supreme ruler and God of this great world is the consciousness in man which says, I am. This consciousness picks up its universe and moves to another town. Every time it walks up and down the street, it takes 100 million solar systems with it. Being so infinitesimal, man cannot realize that they are actually entire worlds. In like manner, we are individual cells in the body of an infinite creation, which is hurling itself through infinity at an unknown speed. Suns, moons, and stars are merely bones in a great skeleton composed of all the substances of the universe. Our own little lives are merely part of the infinite life throbbing and coursing through the arteries and veins of space. But all this is so vast to be beyond in the comprehension of this little I am within us. Therefore, we may say that both extremes are equally incomprehensible. We live in a middle world between infinite greatness on one hand and infinite smallness on the other. As we grow, our world grows also, resulting in a corresponding increase in the scope of our understanding of all these wonders. End of part 3.